you can say that.
Okay.
I'll come to you.
All right.
As the judges were conferring backstage, we all had similar comments about many of you, and that is that you just don't give yourself time to take a good breath. And that seems like a simple thing, but it seems to be a hard thing to remember to do on a consistent basis. And of course, in a competition like this, singing in front of people, you get nervous, and that can affect how you feel your breath. I certainly remember that from when I was doing such things. So that's point number one, to really make sure that and this is a fairly slow song, has a slow tempo, so you have time to take a good breath. And actually, even if in a faster piece, you usually have more time than you think you do to take a good breath. And you also have more time than you think you do to make sure that every note in a phrase sings, which is another thing that young singers don't always follow through with. So, just to reiterate what my colleagues were saying, I think if you just think, I didn't notice upper body tension in your case, which is good, but just make sure that somewhere below the rib cage is where the air is going. So every time you take the breath, just really concentrate that that's happening. I was aware of it a few times, but not consistently. The other thing, also similar to what Ben was saying, you were kind of doing this. You were either reaching for your breath or reaching to the audience, and so posture is important. Ben made a very good point about bring it into you. And actually, when you're singing in a big hall like this, a natural tendency is to want to sing to your audience, express to your audience, so people tend to do this. Draw the audience into you. You've got your little space here, and draw that big space out there into your smaller space here, and they will come to you. Okay? So let's just start it again, and I'll stop you as needed. It's not really marked in the music, but this is, the accepted truth is that in French music, you don't do any retards unless the composer says so. But in earlier French music, and this is very early Debussy, I think you can. And I want de ta pensée. I just want a little bit more time there. Now, another thing about the breath is, and this is something we probably all instinctively do to a certain extent, but also probably are not always successful with it, and that is, when you take the breath, you need to know how far you're going with it. And that's part of getting a song in your voice. When you first learn a new song, you're not familiar with it, so in practicing it, you need to work into your body and your voice, when you take that breath, just how far it's going to go, so you can dole it out appropriately. And another thing that tends to happen is it stops and starts, depending on the shape of the phrase. Like, well, when it goes up, you might kind of stop on a note, and then, but I've got a few more notes still to sing. So it's always got to be moving in a steady pace. And, you don't have a major problem with that at all, but I just think if you thought about that more, we might get a more legato line, for one thing, and probably your breath would go a little bit further. You'd feel more comfortable on the breath. So why don't we just start at the beginning again. But when you get to that de ta pensée, take more time. Okay. Okay, good, good. I think you were thinking in longer terms, in terms of where your breath is going. But along the way, you've got to make sure that you keep singing through every vowel and don't let the consonants kind of interrupt. I'm also hearing something that I call wandering vowels. Do you know what I mean by that? Wandering vowels. It's not a medical condition, but it means that as you're singing a vowel, you kind of anticipate the consonant about to happen, and you allow either your tongue to move or your jaw to move, and it actually changes the vowel. And, you know, it messes up your diction, but more importantly, it messes up the line. I shouldn't say more importantly, just as importantly. Are you aware of that at all? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, yes.
Like, I think there I heard it on long again.
Yeah, long.
Long, you kind of chew on the vowel,
Okay.
which is something that we do in English. Because in English, we have very few pure vowels. And we're constantly moving our articulating anatomy around. And even in singing English, we shouldn't do that. But definitely in singing foreign languages that don't have that characteristic. Try it once more. All even notes, very even. Try once more. That was better, but did you hear a little bit about what I was talking about? I heard it that time on don. Ou don. See, you're anticipating the L of le. Ou don le. And you're very gradually moving the tongue, trying, you know, anticipating your L, and it affects the vowel. Ou, don, le, bon. So at the very last minute. Try it once again. I haven't commented on this yet, but every once in a while on a longer note, your vibrato gets wider. Are you conscious of your vibrato when you sing?
For the most part.
Okay, and I think that's also a function of you kind of sit on your air when you sing those longer notes instead of following through in the way that I was describing. Set amadora. So really, you know, spin the air out. And long notes, the other thing is they shouldn't be static. I mean, it's a different way of saying the same thing. They shouldn't be static. There should always be a sense of movement, of moving through. And that's something you could do better. That was better. Good. I'm going to stop you there because you took your breath that way, your first note was much better. And I noticed in your singing that very often your first note was often kind of fuzzy, not as well defined as it could be, whereas that one was. And I think it's because, and like I say, it's a slow tempo, so even breathing over one beat, there's plenty of time, which is the case here, 1/4 note beat. And your first note was very clear, and it kind of set up the whole phrase.
Right.
Can we do that again? Setam. Because that was very good. That was very good. That's a difficult phrase, the one that goes up high, although it seems like the high note is not at all a problem for you. It's just that most of the song is fairly low, and then all of a sudden you got this phrase that goes up high. But I think you were more conscious of your breaths, and therefore you were comfortable in the phrases with your breath, and also the breaths were more legato. And there was less of that kind of stopping and starting thing that I was talking about, although it's still there a little bit. And I think, just like I wanted you to linger on that phrase before, I think you could linger on the high note.
All right.
It's okay, it's early WC. Let's do, and of course, as you go through that section there, the time for breaths gets shorter and shorter until the breath right before the phrase that goes to the high note is a very quick catch breath. But you were doing that pretty well. It's just a matter of being aware what you have to do when. So let's start at N'est-il plus un parfum, and we'll go all the way to the end of the piece and see how you do.
N'est-il plus un parfum qui reste? Tu le saurais céleste.
Bring them into you. Yeah, you really do have a tendency to want to do this.